Marty, Happy New Year.
Yep. Likewise, Happy New Year, Clyde.
It's been an interesting year this past year. Before we get into the past year, is there anything in particular that you want to accomplish in 2025?
I thought about that today. I don't do New Year's resolutions, but I do set goals, right? I set goals, and I have the same goals as most people, stay healthy and stuff like that. But on a very personal side, I love hiking. And last year, my in 2024 is not a memorable year for hiking for me. Between a few injuries and my infection on my thumb and stuff like that, it's sort of cut into my hiking. So in 2025, I want to go back. I have a plan to go. I had planned this long hike a few years ago that I've never gotten around to doing, and I want to go do that long hike this year. So I have a personal goal of a hike, and I'm not going to reveal it to people. I don't. I'm done revealing my secret locations.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'd say for myself, I want to get more personable. I want to get more involved in more things. We got involved a few times last year. We have an event planned for the 25th coming up in January here in Squamish, British Columbia. I want to be more active and involved, getting people together. I mean, this online stuff is great. It builds an amazing community. I want to be more focused on actually building community building, getting people together, and being more involved, more active in different things, more some of the infrastructure in Canada, going to AGM meetings, going to things like that. That's one of my goals, is to
that's something that I've been lucky to do in the last few years, because I am retired, right? So I've been getting more active, but to your point of getting more involved in person, I think we're probably maybe we set a goal of taking our show on the road. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year. I think there's value in that. I think we could do a cross country tour and stop, and not a 3-month tour, but we could probably go on a road trip for a month one summer. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Okay, that's a fun idea. I'm sure the chat's going wild over that, and there's gonna be leave a comment in the comment section down below if you're listening. You want to.
Yeah, we rent a big RV, and then we write on the side of it, Clyde and Marty, and then we take our RV on the road. Maybe we even put a studio in this little RV or something like that. We go cross country. How cool would that be? Yeah,
that would be fun.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, I know this year we're going to start it by doing meetups, here and there, and that's going to be a good idea. But that sounds like a fun thing to do. I could get into that. I could really get into that. Awesome. So let's get into a bit of the year in review here. Now, you put out a tweet, Marty. What was this? Just today? Was it today or just yesterday? And it was the year in review. It's a perfect template for the show today, because you broke it down month by month in all of 2024, and basically the top stories and what was happening in Canada, what was happening in the United States, and a personal note on each month in this one. So here for January, so starting in January of 2024, 1 year ago to the day, in January, Canada's federal courts declared that the invocation of the Emergencies Act by the Trudeau government during the Freedom Convoy protests in 2022 was not justified and violated Canadians' charter rights.
Think of how pumped up we were at that time, like a year ago, right? Like, we were pumped. I mean, that was huge news.
Big news.
But that somehow or other, the Trudeau managed to distance himself from that, right? I mean, it's how many times has the Emergency Measures Act been invoked in the last 40 years? Like twice, right? It's not
by a Trudeau each time.
By a Trudeau each time, and it didn't even get a proper legal test, right? The proper legal test that I wanted, it would be one where it's adjudicated by the courts, like something like Brian Peckford's challenge, right, on the mandates. So, I mean, this is basically the results of. Yeah, I'll take it. It was a victory, but in the end, it's disappointing.
But what does it do in the future? I mean, like, at this point, we haven't seen the government say, okay, well, you violated charter rights. Now
Yeah.
here are the consequences for like we don't see any of that. None of that's happening. It looks like Trudeau is gonna, he's gonna fail this year. He's not gonna be our prime minister at some point in 2025, and he's gonna walk away from all of these scandals, like all of this, not
Yep.
just the
Yep.
Emergencies Act, but that in particular. He violated charter rights, and there's no consequence for that. That is a scary thought
It
for
is.
Canadians moving forward, because what it does is it has this card, like almost this blank check for governments in the future to say, yeah, well, we could violate their rights, and then the courts will say that eventually, it'll take 2 years, the courts will eventually say, yeah, you shouldn't have done that, and that's it. It's just words.
Yeah, that's how I interpret that. So yeah, that's how we started the year. We started the year on a positive note, and then we went from there. And it was, well, let's keep going. I mean, so how do we want to do this? Do we want to just like literally go month by month? I mean, we can go through
Yeah.
month by month quickly. In the US, the best story I could find for January was the story of geez, I'm drawing
Yeah,
in
it was the US was the indictment of Alec
Alec
Baldwin
Baldwin. Yeah,
for.
yeah, he got
And
indicted. Yeah,
yeah, for people who don't know the story, so they were filming a movie, and he was horsing around. They weren't even recording a scene. He was horsing around with a firearm, and this is a great segue into the way we were talking about before we went live, how firearms are a fun thing that people can enjoy with their, even with their families. It's a sport shooting, all this stuff, but holy cow, man, you got to be safe with it. And
yeah.
it seems to be that these advocates against firearms, when they get their hands on some, they're really unsafe with them. Number one, safety. Learn the 4 rules. Learn the 4 rules. It's very, very straightforward. Don't ever aim a firearm. Assume it's loaded all the
Oh,
time.
always.
Keep it. Never aim the muzzle at something that you don't wish to destroy or kill. Keep your finger off the trigger, and always make sure that is behind the target that you're shooting at. Like if you break any of those 4 rules, people can die. Like that's
And he
the
broke,
scenario of it.
and poor Alex broke all those rules. I mean,
All of them.
and I don't know if I can even sympathize with him, because like you said, I mean, those are rules. What happened there? Well, I don't understand what happened, because these firearms on these stages that they're using in movies are supposed to be sort of non-lethal, and somehow or other this thing hit the producer, and that poor lady got killed. So yeah, it was the big story of the year. And so January in the US, I mean, as we progress through 2024, the US gets really interesting. Actually, so does Canada. I mean, yeah. And then, but let's and back to your earlier point, January is actually, for you and I personally, we had fun in January last year. Last year is when you came to Calgary for Tucker Carlson.
That's right.
So,
That's
and that
right.
was one of our first in-person events. And I mentioned that in that tweet, right? Like these in-person events, like the one we're going to do later this month, I still think people are coming out of, well, 2024 for me will be kind of the year where we really came out of COVID. That's one of the other themes of 2024, right? We finally, the insanity kind of ended, and people are finally recovering. So yeah, that's January 2024.
Yeah,
Off
because
to
they
a slow.
still, even though they, after the Freedom Convoy, they did concede to a lot of things, but some
Yep.
things were still in place. Things like Arrive Can was in place for a very long time. Some of the mandates in certain settings were still in place for a long time, up until what I think it was July. The mandates in British Columbia were still in for healthcare workers. Now,
Oh,
one would argue that they're still in place. They just moved the goalposts in that. But yeah, it's crazy, because up until last year, this time, there were a lot of things that were still happening with COVID wise.
yeah. Who's your health officer in BC? Nothing
Oh,
changed, right?
Bonnie Heimler. I mean, sorry,
She's still,
Bonnie
yeah,
Henry.
she's still the person there in BC. That never changed, right?
Never changed. Never
Yeah.
changed. We
Yeah.
were going to get rid of her in that past election, but the Conservatives didn't win the majority, so she got to keep her seat, keep her job.
Yeah, crazy, crazy, crazy. Yeah, that was January, and yeah.
That was January. All right, let's move on to February. The most popular news story in Canada in February 2024 was the introduction of the Pharmacare Act by Trudeau's government. This was outlined in Bill C-64, which established the groundwork for national universal pharmacare, including the provision of single-payer coverage for contraception and diabetes medication. How many free drugs were given out this year, Marty, since that took place?
Like, again, this is a
Nothing.
classic. Yeah, this is a classic. First of all, right, like the liberals just did their year-end messaging, and they're still bragging about this one, right? Like, as like their year-end messaging of like, hey, look at what we've accomplished is miserable. And in fact, I wanted to, that's something I wanted to do. I did find last year's year-end video, and it's almost virtually identical. It's like the liberals did nothing in 2023 and nothing in 2024. And then this one, they're trying to get a lot of mileage out of it. But at the end of the day, pharmacare is not even their jurisdiction. I mean, it's a perfect example of it's not a federal jurisdiction. A lot of provinces didn't want this, went along with it, but like everything else liberal, it means nothing. Yeah, I bet you. Yeah, nobody's taking advantage of it. Nobody that I know of. I mean, I have in-laws that are in their 70s, and oh yeah, and that was the other thing about this pharmacare thing, right? It's kind of like the dental care. It only applies to like this really weird group of people. Like, you had to be
Very
67.
small
Yeah,
demographic of
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Very
yeah, yeah,
small.
yeah.
And
No,
not only that, there are viewers of the channel that have commented on this saying, yeah, so I was eligible, so they sent me in for the cleaning. I got a cleaning done and some x-rays, and now I'm awaiting approval for the work that they told me I need.
yeah.
And that's it. That's it. Get on a waiting list. Get on a line. That's
Yeah.
We're gonna spend billions of dollars on a queue.
And then and then the things that, like, some of the other things that the liberals have talked about in that, mixed in with pharmacare and dental care is all like, free contraceptives and things like that. I'm like they always draw these weird lines. Like, why not free diabetes medication? Like, why not free insulin? Why not free like real stuff, right? But no, it's something completely like obscure. Free
Well,
contraceptives.
it said it was supposed to include diabetes medications, and nobody's getting any.
No.
Like nobody's. And I work with a guy who has to deal with diabetes every day. He has for his entire life, and he's got to do injections all the time, and he's paying out of pocket. He's always been paying out of pocket. It's just the way it is here.
Yeah. On a side note, and probably some viewers will agree, I'm surprised diabetes hasn't been cured. Right? To me, that was always one of those sort of easy to cure like diseases. And I think big pharma and governments and others, it's a common theme. They don't want to solve that problem because the big pharma makes a ton of money selling testing kits and monitoring devices and insulin and everything else. It's big business. Actually, I'm going to make a note. I wonder how big of a business it is. I bet you it's a big business.
I bet you it's huge. I think it's massive, and it doesn't need to be. It's similar to things like epinephrine, right? So like the EpiPen every 7 years they file a new patent for the EpiPen, so that, and then what do they do next? They lobby the government to tell them to say the old design, we found a fatal flaw in it and it's dangerous and it needs to be outlawed.
Okay.
They do it every 7 years, Marty. And
I know.
how much does an EpiPen cost?
And
it's like $500 or $700. And it doesn't need to be. And epinephrine doesn't expire after the time that they say it does. And it's all a scam.
It's consumerism, right? I mean, it is a scam. It keeps us buying, and it keeps people. It forces. Well, yeah, we can get on. If we're on February, if we keep going down this path, we'll never get anywhere. So let's maybe walk through the stories a little quicker. In the US, I had a hard time finding and for the viewers who are watching, like when I did this thread this morning, I was kind of like thinking, find the big story for Canada, the US, Alberta, because I'm in Alberta, and I always threw in a quick story for myself. The US, in the beginning of the US, was pretty slow in February, right? Like, and the big story.
Here's your story. Yeah, the story is the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl in overtime. The celebration was married by mass shooting at the Victory Parade in Kansas, Missouri, where one person was killed and multiple others were injured, making a major news story due to the context and location of the incident. The Americans also bombed, what is that?
The Houthi, right? Remember
Houthi
the
targets in Yemen.
Americans? Yeah, they were doing again all these. It's interesting to do these look backs at the end of the year because you realize some of the stories stick out, others like just you get forgotten. Like I'd forgotten about the Houthi. There was a time there at the beginning, in January, we're like, oh shit, we're heading into another bigger conflict in the Middle East because they were kind of meddling in.
And then it fizzled. Nothing really ever happened.
It fizzled. Yeah. It kind of fizzled. And then what was the last?
Well, everybody
story?
like the news media. They want you to think it's World War III around the corner because then you won't tune out.
Well, and then the other thing that this shows when we went by the time we're done reviewing the year, it is crazy how half the stories seem a little bit exaggerated to distract us, right? And you and I talk about this all the time. I mean, there are purposeful distraction like that happen, and and then we move on into the news cycle. So yeah. What did I have for Alberta?
Alberta, the story in Alberta was in February 2024. You and Twos, what was that, the AGM that you went to?
We were yeah, that was funny. We were going around to all these NDP open houses in February. We were getting disguised, and because at that time there was a topic on the Alberta pension plan, and you can see barely the orange of my and then we're in unfriendly territory there, right? Like people are looking at us.
Mark, you don't look like an NDP when you wear orange. You just look like a hunter. You stick out like a sword, like you stick out like an infected thumb.
Yeah. Have you had Twos on your show at all? Yeah, you co-hosted. Absolutely. Yeah. You co-hosted. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. He's so fun. And I look forward to the next time we have him on again. Because Twos is hilarious. And he's always with Sean Newman doing the podcast, and they do a fantastic job. So everybody go check that stuff out. Let's get into the next story. So this is the next month. We're talking about in March we saw the passing of Brian Mulroney in Canada. So that was a big story. Famous prime minister.
He's the first prime minister I ever voted for. So I turned 18 probably in 1985, I think, or 80. In 85 I would have turned 18 or 86, and in the first election that I could vote at federally would have been about 85, 86, and I vote and Mulroney. So first time I ever voted, and he was the prime minister in my youth when I was in university. And I saw Mulroney many times. I actually went to school at the University of Ottawa. So I went to school in Ottawa. And back in those days, politicians like Mulroney could come out of the House of Commons and literally walk to 24 Sussex. And we'd say hi to him, hey, Mr. Mulroney, and how are you? And then he'd shake a few hands, and he'd have maybe one or two security guards. Like he'd have a police officer that you could see sort of over his shoulder, but then he'd walk. And then if you drove in front of 24 Sussex in those days or rode your bike by there, there'd be a little shack outside 24 Sussex and an officer in there, and then a car parked in front of the street, and that was it.
So nobody's walking up, nobody's shaking his hand and telling him to get the F out of their province.
No, how times have changed is mind-boggling how times have changed, right? I mean, and after Mulroney, even the Chrétiens of the world and all these other guys, it was respectful, right? Politics was, Trudeau changed everything. I mean, Trudeau just now, I think, increased the RCMP said it this week that they're increasing the budget and his security detail. So anyways, so
if I look back and I think about Mulroney, because I was so little when he was prime minister, but the only thing that comes to mind is the phrase from Milton Friedman: there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government measure. And we all know this now because Mulroney was the one, despite agreeing with him on a number of things, he was the one who brought in GST as a temporary measure to balance the budget. They balanced the budget, and we're still living with it today. So
And but
even if it's your guy,
yep.
don't go along with this stuff
Now
because
he
it's
brought it
permanent.
in at 7%. Then somebody, I think Harper dropped it to 6 and then 5 or whatever. And speaking of Milton, I was right, and I did find that quote. Milton is the guy who used the term balance budgets always balance themselves. But he was talking about it in a negative way, saying there's nothing to stop a government from overspending, and therefore their budgets balance themselves because they borrow or they print more money. So he used the term, and I don't think Trudeau was paraphrasing Milton. He's not that smart to do it, but maybe he was. Trudeau had heard that concept somewhere, right? Budgets balance
It looked
themselves.
rehearsed when he said
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Like it looked rehearsed, like he heard it somewhere.
yeah.
Like some idiot quoting a smarter person.
Yeah.
That's all I see.
Now, interestingly enough, in March was also the first time that the Conservatives brought up a non-confidence motion, which will
Oh,
be relevant. Yeah, so that I put that in there. That was the
when the
first time
Conservatives
that.
first tried to defeat the Trudeau Liberals with a non-confidence motion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then that was also remember last year or in 2023 we actually raised a petition with 400,000 names. Remember that Michelle Ferrer had a big giant petition with 400,000 names calling on a non-confidence motion, and that's all related to that. So
Yeah.
that was delivered to the Parliament in December 2023, and then early in 2024 was that first non-confidence motion. At the end of the day, I could find three. There was three non-confidence motions in 2024. So the first one
And
was in
all
March, and
defeated.
all defeated. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
then
because of Jagmeet Singh propping
absolutely
up our current government, and
Yep.
he'll go down forever as being that guy. And I think he's trying to switch that around currently with his contemporary outlook as he's putting it out there. I'm
Yep.
going to take down the government. And he wants to be the hero at the end of it. We'll never forget what he did.
No.
Well, that's his legacy. It'll always be his legacy. In America, the cargo ship collided with a supporting pillar of the 47-year-old Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, hurling steel, concrete, and people into the water. 6 people died. 2 were rescued. That's
we'd all forgot. It's like we all forgot about that, right? Like it's like remember, I got a lot of shit for that one at the time. Right?
I do remember that.
Yeah, because I said, it looked like a controlled explosion. We still don't know. Right? It's one of those things. The story happened. It distracted from whatever the frick was happening in the Middle East and all over the place. Everybody stopped paying attention to everything else. We all focused on that. And then
what we do know about it is the power on the ship went down. So the power on the ship went down, and it had momentum in a direction, and they weren't able to steer it away from the thing, even though they had dropped anchor trying to get it to move in a different direction, but it just full steam ahead.
Sure, bang. but did it lose power nefariously? Did somebody take control of it? Did somebody do that? I'd like to see
Nobody knows.
I'd like to see the front of that boat, right? Because I'd like to see it in dry dock to see what that front looked like. Did it hit the concrete pillar perfect? Anyways, it's just fascinating. And the Americans rebuilt that thing. 6 weeks later, they had boats going through there. It was crazy. So, but another one of those stories, done, one and done. That's it. We forgot about it. Yeah. And then on a personal note, for me in March, I put a comment in there. For me in March was the first time I left the country since 2019.
No kidding.
I actually, I get winter. Remember how brutal winter was last year? Like January, February. Here in Alberta, it was like cold. So I decided at the last minute in March, I'm out of here.
Knock on wood, we're having a pretty decent one this year.
Yeah. and then I made a joke because I didn't know, like, am I going to make it out of the country? Like, am I on a no-fly list? And it all turned out good.
That's too funny. I still have yet. I can't remember the last time I left the country. Oh no, I've flown to Japan.
You've gone to Japan almost annually since I've known you. So
yeah, I think we might be skipping this year, or I'll be skipping this year. I think the family's gonna go, but I'm gonna stay home this time. Not going to test out the old no flies fly
Actually,
list.
and when I flew in March, I went to Mexico directly, so I still haven't entered the U.S. So maybe I'm not allowed in the U.S. I don't know, and the reason I think that I seriously thought I might have been on some no-fly list because I was vocal against the vaccine mandates and other things, man. And I thought whatever. Yeah, it's all good. That was March, man.
That was March. Let's get into April here. Okay.
Yeah.
So the big story in Canada in April was the total solar eclipse. That was a big thing. I've seen a few of them in my lifetime now. It's pretty incredible. Here in British Columbia, it wasn't quite as spectacular as it would have been if you were in Niagara Falls. That was like the hot spot for viewing the solar eclipse. So here's a picture that was taken from that area.
Yeah.
For some people, it was overcast. That's a real shame when that happens. But I've seen them a few times in my lifetime. Once when I was a kid in Windsor, Ontario. Once in British Columbia years ago, there was a total one that was visible there. And then this past one, which was almost total. It was just a little lacking. That's what we saw.
I mean, I watched this one. We had an overcast day, but I watched it with my welding helmet on and looked up in the sky, and it was disappointing. I mean, it wasn't total enough in Alberta, like it crossed a certain part of the world, right? I think it was further east where they had closer to a total eclipse. We had about, I don't know, 80%. But it didn't do that dramatic. Like I was hoping it would, like the sky would go dark. We didn't get that. We didn't get the dark sky. So yeah.
If you ever get a chance to see it, like the actual full total one where it's 100%, it's something to see. It's pretty spectacular.
I'm sure it is. And then in the U.S. is when things started getting interesting in the U.S. I remember back in the U.S. in April is when they started hitting Trump with all these charges, and he ended up in court, right? Like he got hit by all sorts of subpoenas and whatnot. And
I like how you wrote it, because the way you wrote it is a bit like how the news media has been trying to spin it. So prosecutors went after Trump for paying hush money to a prawn star.
No, a porn star, I wrote. Yeah.
I'm trying not to say that word, Marty.
Oh, I see. Oh, sorry. Okay, got it.
So, but the prawns, nobody likes to talk about prawns on YouTube. But so that's how they painted it. So we're talking about Stormy Daniels, correct? That's the person. So hush money, there was a decision that came from a member of his staff at the time. I don't think he had anything to do with it, but they tried to because it sounds like a damaging story, but there's nothing illegal happening. So what they tried to do was, in a roundabout way, nab him for campaign finance law violations, and that's what they tried to get him on with that story. So that's what the real offense they were trying to prosecute in the courts was. But the public opinion court, they were running with this story because that sounds more salacious than what they were actually trying to get him with.
Totally. But the what we all need to remember, I mean, what I take away from this is what I'm reminded of is just how hard they went after Trump, right? In
absolutely.
March, April, May, June. Like they were worried. They knew he was going to be the next contender, and they threw everything at him. And
they went against their own rules, totally. Right? So over the statute of limitations, they changed a misdemeanor into a federal crime. So they tried to turn it into a felony, and it's all being overruled now. Like it's all being overruled, not just because Trump's becoming the president, but because they went outside of the boundaries. People are like, they're looking at it that some people might be barred from the bar.
It's a very dangerous game, right? It's a dangerous game that they played in the US. It's a dangerous game we're playing in Canada as well. Like, I don't think politicians want to go down that path of like, of attacking each other when they're no longer in office, because it's just like, whatever they did to Trump can turn around and do it to Joe Biden and do it to the next person. And it opens a dangerous can of worms. Now, once again, parts of the US.
Then there's the idea like, oh, what? So you're untouchable if you served in government? Like,
no.
After you, after the fact, we want to see some.
I'm not advocating you're untouchable. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying don't go after people for petty stuff, after the fact. Don't be vindictive just because, whatever. But the other beauty of that, of what happened with Trump, is it also shows how powerful the US Constitution is, right? Remember, like, there was people tried to, like, the Constitution, their Constitution predicted all of this, and it worked. Like, some judges looked at what was happening, is like, no, you can't do that. This is, anyways, it was, for them, what I was impressed with the US is that an individual citizen like Trump was able to fight back against the whole government, right? Think about, like, man, it was a fascinating story, and we know how it ends, in come November. So yeah. And then in Alberta, the story, I did talk about it just because I want to talk about it, but I remember being in Alberta. I was so mad in April because, it's a repeat. It's the repeat. It's the cycle, right? As soon as April comes around, you guys had the same thing in BC. Oh, drought, fire, forest fires.
Unprecedented is a term you never stop hearing. It's all precedented. We've seen it every year.
You guys had atmospheric rivers. You were, like, on one side, you guys are worried about atmospheric rivers. We're worried about drought, and
same time, Marty.
Totally.
You can't have both. You can't have both. But we were getting both in British Columbia. Rainforest, atmospheric rivers drying out too much. Like, what is it?
Now that's another cool thing about Trump. Did you see the video the other day of Trump speaking somewhere and literally making fun of the climate hoax? Maybe we don't want to talk about it too much, but Trump's going to bust down a lot of narratives, man. He's going to So
a lot of people will be vindicated. A lot of guys like Patrick Moore, who's been talking about this for years. Incidentally, one of the guys who founded Greenpeace because he wanted to stop nuclear testing in the North Pacific. Like, that's dangerous stuff. But then he quit Greenpeace because they became mental patients. Like,
too radical and going after things that were not
productive. Not productive and not real. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I miss those days where when Greenpeace was, that's noble to be against testing nuclear weapons in the Atlantic or the Pacific, and they were against whaling and stuff like that, like legitimate causes. So
nowadays it's nonsense. It's shut down the industry because they've got the meme in their head. They've got the mental mind virus of socialism, of Marxism. That's where they're at. Now, moving on to May, the month of May. If we want to get through all of these, we got to move a little bit faster. May, Trudeau accused India of sending assassins to kill Canadian Sikh separatists in BC. This hasn't ended. They keep going on with this story. It's become a big deal in Canada.
Yep. Remember you and I talking about this? Like, why is Trudeau picking a fight with India? And it's a complicated story, right? That's a good
one to distract from the things that are happening at home, right? For him.
Yep.
That's really what it came down to. And it turns out after all this time, India is doing a lot of the same stuff. Like, India's government is in a bit of a pickle with their people, and there's so much. It's hard to know what's true anymore because they're the scam capital of the world. Like, none of the information that you get is reliable. Like, none of it. It's unbelievable.
That's actually what you just said is something I tweeted about today.
No kidding.
I tweeted because today there was that story in Vegas of the Tesla Cybertruck exploding in front of the Trump Plaza, right? And again, my gut reaction, similar to when I looked at the bridge damage, in May, my gut reaction is, oh, that looks weird. That looks suspicious, right? Like, just on this day in Vegas, a Cybertruck in front of the Trump Plaza suddenly blows up. Okay, so all I said about this one is, I don't know the story, but at this point, I don't think anything's coincidental anymore. I just don't. Like, I've become so and I've been proven right way more often than I've been proven wrong. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the shit happening these days.
I just like, either way, if it was planned, that's awful. That's an act of terror. If it was not planned, that's awful. That's going to tank Tesla if their vehicles are just exploding, right?
Which
That's
they have,
really
right?
bad.
I mean, I
Well,
fought
they've
it.
caught fire,
They've
but
caught
blowing up
fire.
the way that thing blew up.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to search after the video, but the way it blew up, that is particularly violent.
yeah,
And if that was an incidental thing that happened in one of their vehicles, that's major recall territory. That's industry
yeah, yeah.
destroying kind
Totally,
of
totally.
thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
No, no.
we'll
But
see
yeah,
what ends up coming of that. Another
yeah.
notable story from that month, let's get into this, was the beginning of an investigation into what was described as Trudeau's Winnipeg lab cover-up, involving the allegations of Beijing operatives infiltrating Canada's most secure lab. This raised concerns about national security and the government's handling of sensitive information. But hey, if he would have just got his security clearance, right, Marty?
Oh, I mean, yeah, me trying to pick one quick story for a month. I mean, May is when we really started hearing about Chinese interference and all of that. We'd heard about it for the years beforehand, but the story really started to grab national attention at that point. God, like, and when again looking back in hindsight, the liberals are really good at distracting and taking our attention away from stories. Like some stories like that one have to be brought up like 3, 4, 5, 100 times by different journalists before it finally gains traction. Because I know,
Yes.
I know
I
there's
remember it
journalists.
coming out
Yeah,
early in 2022, and
yeah.
it didn't become a big story until 2024. So
There you go.
that's a thing. 2 years before it became a
And we
major
still don't know the
story.
true story about the Wuhan lab and our involvement with Winnipeg lab and all that. Like
I have
man,
my
like
suspicions, and I bet you, I
yeah,
bet you they're pretty on point.
yeah, yeah. And then
That's
yeah, and then in the US was then in a short month by then Trump got convicted of all those counts, right? I mean, it was looking pretty ugly for Trump for a while there because some judges were finding him guilty of all these miscellaneous trumped up charges and stuff like that. So
mhm.
but
Is that when he actually got his mugshot? Is that when that took place?
um yeah, I
'Cause
can't
that
remember.
went
Yeah,
viral.
yeah, yeah.
They actually booked him, and he got his mugshot. That
Yeah,
became
and
a
look at what I
campaign
said there.
tool.
I said that the Democrats thought they had the knockout blow on Trump, but nope, you were wrong, boys.
Oh no, it rejuvenated him. In fact, a lot of people were speculating that this was a big reason for why they converted over the so-called black vote.
Yep.
There's a lot of people in the black community in the United States that are just disenfranchised with the structures that are in place, especially like jailing and arrests. And when they saw Trump get arrested for trumped up charges, they're like, "That's my guy. That's
Well,
my guy."
actually,
That's the
yeah.
sentiment.
You know who has a great comedy bit on that? It's Dave Chappelle, right? Dave Chappelle
Yeah.
makes he in one of his specials, he singles out that moment. He says something like yeah, he quotes Trump saying, "I know the system's broken because I use the system." And Chappelle goes, "Wait a minute, like that's why we love that guy because he's telling us the truth. Like he's obviously, yeah, Trump was on the record as saying that. I know the system's broken. I'm taking advantage of it. Perfect.
That's right. That's right. And then
Yeah,
that's what
and I'm
opened
going
the
to fix
door to
it."
them trying to get his tax returns, which when they finally did get his tax returns, which he could have handed them over, but he wanted to make them fight for it. And then when they got it, it was so benign. It was like he crossed every T, he dotted
Yeah, yeah,
every I.
yeah,
I mean, that's what
yeah,
you do when you're a millionaire, a billionaire. You
yeah,
do that. And that's how you get around the tax code and survive as a business person. You
yeah.
have to make sure your tax returns are on point. And then one of the most significant stories from Alberta was the wildfire situation, particularly around Fort McMurray. The largest wildfire was reported out of control, leading to evacuation orders and restrictions.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
so
and we
that
weren't
wasn't the
in.
same month as Jasper, right?
No, Jasper is the big story for next month. For July, is the
Mm.
big story is Jasper, but Fort McMurray got evacuated for the second time in about, I don't know, 6 years. And again, it's like, why are we still facing the same consequences? Did nobody learn anything in Fort McMurray? Like, go cut those trees within a kilometer of town, like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Logging. That's what needs to happen. And control burns.
yes,
But
control burn.
really, we're I'm beating a dead horse with this one. What we need to be doing is not what we've been doing for the past 100 years. Fire suppression management is not a good way to go. Creates too much fuel load, and then when we do have fires, they're catastrophic.
Well, yeah. Let's keep talking on this, but go to July, right? It was the story of July, right? So July, I chose the Jasper's fires.
I think we're skipping over June.
Oh, did we skip over June? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go to June. Go to June.
Wait, where were we?
I thought we were in June already because
this is June now.
Okay,
we're just getting into June. Biggest story in Canada in June was the surprising defeat of the Liberal Party in Toronto St. Paul's by-election, which has been a long-standing Liberal stronghold. And this is amazing because this was a surprise to them, which I love. I love the fact that it was a surprise to them.
And they threw the money into this one. Remember this? Like the Liberals were nervous about this one. In a by-election, in a by-election allows them to focus, right? So I remember that by-election because suddenly everybody, let me collect my thoughts. Every minister suddenly visited Toronto, right? Like an MP from another nearby town can come lend his support to the campaign in Toronto, but they're not going to come from across the country, whatever, because it costs money. But they used they suddenly in Toronto, every MP, whether it was like the defense minister, every minister visited Toronto because we knew that what they were doing, they're campaigning, but they do it on our dime as the minister visiting. And yeah, they got creamed in that by-election. I mean, that was really a big turning point for the Liberals. Up until that point, some people have been asking for Trudeau's resignation or for him to step down, but at that point it became a chorus,
it still didn't graduate to the level that we're seeing now, but there was a lot of people, backbenchers, putting out open letters in anonymous form and leaking to the media what their intentions were to get rid of Trudeau. But at that time, it hadn't yet quite fomented into what it is today.
No, it had.
It was the beginning of the end. It was definitely
absolutely, yeah. And then what happened in the U.S.?
In the U.S., NVIDIA surpassed Apple on June 18th to become the world's most valuable company. Demand for its artificial intelligence chips fueled the surge in its stock price. It's a $2 trillion company. That's unbelievable.
That's so unbelievable. Just scroll down a little bit. Look at the image I put with that.
Wow!
There, right? Like that's the GDP of countries. That's the GDP of countries. Okay, that's the GDP of countries. And NVIDIA is bigger than the GDP of
Russia. Russia, and we're all worried about Russia, right? It's like, come on, a company's bigger than their.
And the Americans have almost. I think the Americans. I remember when a $1 trillion company was a big deal. The first $1 trillion company was Exxon in the U.S. about a decade ago. I think Coca-Cola came close, and then all of a sudden there was a rush of them. Right, there was Apple became a $1 trillion company. Tesla is a $1 trillion company. Like I think they have $5 trillion companies. Like holy smokes! Well, we talked about this last week. Tesla is a $1 trillion company. It's a more than $1 trillion company, and it's got 180,000 employees worldwide. So if you think of Tesla in GDP per capita kind of terms, it doesn't totally apply, but each Tesla employee is has a GDP of $10 million. Like,
imagine that level of productivity. Holy cow.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And
that's amazing.
Then, yeah. Meanwhile, we have like a GDP of $2 trillion with 40 million people. So our per capita GDP keeps falling. It's
per person. Yeah, I could pop this back on the screen here again. So Canada sitting there at $2.24 trillion.
Yeah.
That's wow.
This is the AI revolution, right? It's going to be it's going to be big. It's going to be big. It's a big changer. It's a big changer. Yeah, those were the stories and
that was the same month that Calgary, the water main broke, and you guys are still dealing with that, right?
we're still dealing with that, and it was also the month that the Oilers went to the Stanley Cup and finals and got defeated in Game 7. What a heartbreaker! What a
That
heartbreaker!
is, but
Yep.
I mean, that's the most entertaining
Oh, hey,
series
June was
if it
big
goes
for
to
you
game.
and I. Look at
Yeah.
June. Look at the bottom. I
Oh,
forgot that June is when you and I
right.
went to the Wii Unified Conference.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
we did our show live in front of a live in-person audience. There's a big I can't remember what the capacity of the auditorium was, but it was packed. And that was something else. That was a new experience for the both of us. And getting to meet all those people at the event was
Well, think of
fantastic.
who we got to meet. We got to meet Jay Bhattacharya. Like,
Yeah.
we met him. We got to meet doctor who's the other doctor we got to meet oh god, this is my brain's on fog from last night. I am on like,
Yeah,
anyways, no, it
absolutely.
was a great conference, and the left
And
tried
all
to
the people
can
that came to see us, it was what was really cool about it is every time there was a break, we just mingled with everybody. It wasn't like, the talent go over here backstage or whatever. No, we went, we got to hang out with everyone, and people were so pleasant. It was amazing. Incidentally, there was protesters at the event for
yeah.
the first day, and it fizzled out because people didn't even know what they were protesting.
Well, they didn't even know. I mean, they were protesting what some of the comments that Lauren Southern had done or said or whatever. And yeah, it was. It's too bad because they did succeed, the protesters, in making the organizers pay waste $50,000 on additional security, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. There's
yeah,
there's that. But
yeah,
yeah, it was largely a success. It was We Unify making their annual conference that much bigger than it was the year before, after they made it bigger from the year before that.
yeah.
And hopefully they do it again this year. If we get an invite, I'm coming. I'm coming. Because that was a lot of fun. It was a great time.
I'm not taking a bus if I go this time.
I forgot about that. I
Yeah,
totally forgot about that. You'll have to hit us up in the comments later if you want to hear that story. Let's
yeah,
move on to the next month. Pop it up here. The biggest story in Canada, Alberta, in July was the destruction of Jaspertown site because of the gross incompetence of the politicians and senior bureaucrats. That's
yeah,
what happened
yeah.
in British Columbia, or sorry, in Jasper, Alberta. I always see Jasper and I always think BC, because what is it? Is that the resort where you go up the ski lift and it says "Welcome to BC"?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it?
yeah,
It
yeah.
actually
It's right
goes
on the
in the.
Yeah, it's on the Continental Divide. Actually, the Continental Divide goes through all the national parks. Like almost every national park is an Alberta on one side, and it's a different park on the BCC side, like Yoho and what's the other one?
I'm drawing a blank too. There's
Yeah,
Jasper and no, what's the other one? I forget. Lake Louise.
no, Lake Louise is in Banff. Holy smokes, I'm drawing a blank too. Anyways, yeah, so that was the big story, man. I choose that. For me, I almost choose that as one of the bigger stories of the year, outside of politics, of course, of Trudeau and whatnot. But that hurt a lot of Canadians. People got upset about that. I mean, it's Jasper is memories for millions of Canadians who visited. So
And
I
it was
put that
needless. It was needless. Like,
totally
it was
needless.
really a failure of our government. And
Yep.
we saw this only the year before in the shoe swap in British Columbia, where the government just kind of dopey idiots getting in the way and stopping people from fixing their own problems, right?
Yep.
Get out of the
Yep.
way, government. These people were hardworking people, were absolutely apt at doing what they were doing. They were shutting down pump houses. They were shutting down the roads. They were stopping people from being able to travel and go in and fight fires around
And
people's properties. And it creates more destruction. It's awful what they've done.
and Jasper, after in the investigations afterwards, we learned all sorts. Like the incompetence is deep, right? I mean, so many reports had made it to Guilbeault's desk saying this is a disaster waiting to happen, and he ignored everything. Like Guilbeault should be on trial for some of this. Like their mismanagement goes beyond mismanagement. Like it's the mismanagement of some of our government officials. Yes, they're protected by some sort of they're immune from liability if they accidentally do something that hurts. But some of these guys are beyond that. Guilbeault in particular. Guilbeault is mismanaging beyond. It's criminal what he's doing.
Well,
Anyways,
yeah,
don't
nefarious
get
is
me
the
going.
word.
Yeah,
Nefarious
yeah.
is the word, because my thought of the motive in all of this is that if they do nothing and there is a disaster, then they get to go along with their agenda of blaming it on climate change
Yep.
instead of the real cause being mismanagement, as we discussed.
And this one backfired on him, right? Like the idea, people are smarter than that. Like the real story came out, and people realized, no, this isn't climate change, man. Even the beetles that ate the trees, that's not climate change.
No.
That's what the beetles do every 20 or 30 years as an infestation, because the trees are too old. And then the beetles kill the trees, and then if you don't get rid of the trees, it was mismanagement. So yeah, that was a big story. But July was interesting in the U.S. as well. Like July was getting really interesting.
Biggest news story in the U.S. in July 2024 was involved around a series of significant political events. These included an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, President Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the 2024 presidential race, and a subsequent endorsement of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. Remember,
how
they're called the
crazy of a month
Democrat
is that,
Party,
right? Like that was a crazy month in the U.S. Crazy
well,
month.
They're called the Democrat Party, and they undemocratically put someone in the headline position. But yeah, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump really was, I mean, you could say that their false accusations and prosecution of Trump was a game changer. This was the real game changer that
Yes.
solidified his victory in the election, and it won a lot of people's support for him. He is lucky to be alive. He's absolutely lucky to be alive, because holy cow,
The animations of that are crazy. Like
he
in 1
just turned
second.
his head at the right moment.
Totally. Yep.
Unreal. Caught in the ear. And people, there's some people that say, oh, he faked it. There's no faking that, folks. I mean, you're talking to two guys who know firearms. There's no faking it.
No. And somebody else got killed. Even the other day, somebody said, oh, that had to be fake. I'm like, well, if it's fake, then it's shitty that 2 people got killed. Like,
right?
Like, come on. There was a spectator. Again, one of those weird. Yeah. I wonder if the U.S. will make that their big news story of the year, or will it be the election or whatever? I mean, yeah, who knows? But yeah, July was interesting. July was, and it's amazing how long ago that was, right? It feels like it was just yesterday, but it was actually in July. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can't believe that. But
Crazy.
yeah, Pennsylvania, they don't get nice weather this time of year. It definitely was beautiful at that time when that took place. Now, going into August, you did do a personal note for July about renovating your daughter's condo. I don't know if you want to get into that, but that's the big news in August was the flooding in Quebec. There's no heat wave this year, so the media had to find something else to scream climate change. That's August, also marked by the pro-Palestinian protests across the country.
The protests were really pronounced in August, right? There were, I mean, the flooding. I bet you if you ask people about the flooding, most people don't remember the flooding.
No,
they're definitely. We didn't talk about heat waves this year. There was no heat waves anywhere across the Canada.
Oh, remember the heat dome from the year before? Holy cow!
Yeah.
The heat dome that nobody was experiencing, but it was showing up on maps.
Yeah, no. August was pretty quiet in Canada. The Parliament's recessing. There were some interesting, funny stories still. I mean, the pressure started, like Parliament wasn't quite sitting, but there were committees going on. I mean, ArriveCan and all that was being talked about, but yeah, it was pretty quiet in August. Yeah.
And on the American side, Harris was formally declared the replacement nominee on August 2nd. She introduced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, who is a complete failure. Nobody wanted to run with Kamala because it was a losing ticket and it's a career ender. And everybody pretty much realized that. I don't know if there's much else to say about
No,
that.
no,
In
no.
Alberta, Danielle Smith spent the summer doing town halls in an effort to convince Albertans that her party was actually doing things.
Yeah,
That's
and I went to about 7 of those.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
We better keep moving, man. It's like it's we're
we're
approaching
only at
8 o'clock.
September.
Like, holy
Yeah,
smokes. Yeah,
we're
let's
only
go
at
real
September.
quick through the
So
yeah.
in September, Jagmeet Singh finally tore up his supply and compensation agreement. Remember how confident he was about that? I tore it up. I'm totally an independent somebody else other than the bootlicker lapdog for the Liberal Party. It turns out he was just a bootlegging
Yeah.
lapdog for the Liberal Party. That's all that ever happened with that.
And then
September.
I couldn't find any good stories for the US, but then I remembered that, and I went looking. September was when Mossad bought a bunch of pagers and walkie-talkies that they gave to
Oh, right. The bad guys.
the bad guys, and then
Well, they
started
infiltrated, or they were able to stop a shipment that they had made. Now,
Yeah.
this is kind of a funny story. We don't have to get too deep into it, but they openly declared that cell phones were a bad thing because they could be hacked and all their information could get out. So the leader said, "You guys got to get pagers and
Yeah.
old technology." So Mossad found where they were getting those pagers from, and they stopped the shipment, and then they installed explosive devices in them and then sent them all out. And one fateful afternoon, kaboom.
That's nasty, eh? I mean, if
That's
you think
really
about it,
nasty.
that's really nasty. Don't mess with Mossad, man. Like, and then in the good old days, like, remember we used to always joke about this. Like, if whenever an Iranian scientist would be in a weird bike accident or a bus accident or a boating accident, we always knew that behind the scene it was Mossad. I mean, those guys, like, yeah. Did you ever see the movie? Mossad. Not Berlin. What was it? What was the movie where they did a documentary on how Mossad took 10 years after the where was the massacre? Anyways, I'm wasting time. Let's move on.
Sure.
My brain is
There's so much to get to. There's so much to get to.
Yeah.
In Alberta, Smith revealed she was going to update the Alberta Bill of Rights, which ended up happening later on. So that was the month that she made that announcement. Moving on to October, Canada was all about the foreign interference and political leadership. Trudeau faced significant internal pressure with reports of liberal revolt against his leadership. So that this is where, I mean, this is an ongoing story, and it has been for a while, but this was
there was the inquiry, right? I mean, the
development.
inquiry was going on in October, the inquiry into foreign interference, and like it came to a boil for Trudeau there. The whole, I mean, I can't believe they're still grasping at this one. They're still asking, like, the diehard Trudeau supporters online are still asking, like, saying that Poilievre won't get his security clearance, blah, 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 blah. Like, come on.
But and the answer to that is he'll have his security clearance as a function of being prime minister when he wins the election. So don't worry about it. He'll get his security clearance.
Yep.
That's really where that is. In the US, there was a McDonald's E. coli breakout. I don't even remember that. The CDC reported that 75 people fell ill and one person died after consuming McDonald's quarter pounders tainted with E. coli.
It went on for almost 10 days. Yeah. It's funny what we forget, right? And the reason I remember this is because I also, like, I've talked about this a lot. And we got to be careful when we talk about this on the show today. But, historically, if you had an outbreak of E. coli, lettuce would get pulled off the shelf, even in Alberta, even everywhere around the world, or cucumbers or whatever. Like, a few people are hurt by something like that. But then in the last 3 or 4 years, we have another event that occurs. We have a dangerous product on the market that's killing lots of people, and it's not being pulled. I just like to remind people of that all the time. Like, we freak out. Like, hey, don't eat lettuce because 3 people got sick from eating lettuce. But hey, all this other stuff.
Right. Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah.
I'll put my chances against the ailment that we're trying to avoid. Let's just
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
I'll put my chances up against that one. In Alberta, Smith continued battling Ottawa. This time, the focus was on the unfair carbon tax exemptions given to Eastern Canadians who used heat oil to heat their homes.
Right. So
Oil heat
this
their
is
homes.
where she finally launched sort of an constitutional challenge. We'll see where that goes, but yeah.
Well, good for her. That was a good move in my opinion, and
It's a good move.
bad move. It was a bad move on the part of the Liberals to try to sway votes for a by-election. Like that really what it came down for. Like down to they just wanted to get a little bit of support to maintain that Liberal votership in the East Coast. It's like, how can you put a tax on a particular thing for the environment, and then your political career is more important than the environment? That's what really where they put on display there, that they'll do whatever they have to stay in power. They don't care about Canadians. They care about getting elected. That really is it. In November 2024, this was about Trump 2.0 in America. That was that was the big news, obviously, at the time. Meanwhile, in Canada, Parliament has been at a standstill due to a combination of political attacks and disputes over document disclosure related to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDDC for short. Yeah, they squandered billions of dollars, embezzled money, and they don't want the RCMP to get their hands on this information because it could lead to arrests for real crimes.
Yeah, and then one of these weird twists, the Speaker of the House is actually involved in this, and he's doing what he's supposed to do. I mean, he's basically holding the Liberals in contempt in some sort of way, but I don't think he's going far enough. I mean, yeah, our Parliament is frozen right now because we have a minority government that keeps being propped up by guys like Jagmeet and by the Bloc. And remember, October, November, all the weirdness that you and I were constantly talking about. I mean, the Bloc made their ultimatum, we want this change, change the supply management for milk and give money to old age. And then the Bloc threatened to vote against non-confident. They never did it. Jagmeet never did it. I mean, there was a weird vote, right? In November, there was a non-confidence vote. I think it was the third one. We missed one somewhere along the way. There was a non-confidence vote on the carbon tax for that previous reason, for the when the Liberals cancel the carbon tax on home heating oil for Eastern Canada. That's unfair. And they tried to challenge them on a non-confidence vote on that, and it got defeated. That was the first time where Jagmeet really, really showed that he was just a snake in the grass, right? It's anyways,
real piece of work. A real piece of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Alberta, Smith got 91.5% vote of confidence at the AGM. That's a big deal. That means that she's got pretty well unanimous support from the party there. And then you had to plow your driveway 6 times in November. That's such a Canadian thing to say. That's so hilarious. Really, that cracks me up. Yeah. All right, which brings us to December. Here we are. We're at the last month. This is where we are currently. In Ottawa, the Liberal Party was in total collapse. The biggest news was the resignation of Freeland. I mean, that was the biggest news. But I think even on top of that, maybe even on top of that was the calls for Justin Trudeau to step down from his own party, and not even anonymously anymore. Mark, this is when they went public and they said, I myself, this person with this name and title, want Justin Trudeau to step down, and I'm willing to say
at last count, it's well over 30 Liberal MPs are on one form of record or another saying they want Trudeau to step down. Some have published letters on their own on Twitter and other social platforms. Many have said it in the scrum coming out of the House of Commons. Some have said it on the news. They've said it everywhere. So it's going to be interesting. And we talked about this quickly last week. So on some of the parliamentary committees, the one of the big standing committees on finance has been convened for January 7th. When would that be? Next week sometime, right? Today's the 1st. Yeah. Is today the 1st? Yeah. So next Wednesday, they're reconvening, and they will attempt to pass a non-confidence motion in a committee, and then the report of the committee will go to the House of Commons in January when it reconvenes. They're going to hit this one on all sides. Like, the Conservatives are going to hit Trudeau on all sides.
Apparently, and I talked to Northern Perspective, and they said that this procedurally could work.
Yeah.
So it's not a fruitless endeavor. It's not just posturing.
No, but let's not forget that Jagmeet's also on the record. He wrote the letter saying he will defeat the government at the first opportunity. So
that would be the first opportunity. He's already set for his pension by the time it would go to an election anyway. So he has no reason to prop up the government.
So the only thing that could happen there is Trudeau could be really sneaky and come in and try and prorogue Parliament, like, boom, right off the bat. We'll see if he does. So
it's very possible. It's very possible, and for different reasons too. It could be because he wants to stay in power. It could be because he's doing a favor for the Liberals by saying prorogue so that they can have a leadership convention, a leadership election within their party. Do you think he would do? I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think his hubris is really showing, especially in that This Hour is 22 Minutes interview, where he believes he's still in it to win it. I gotta put this up. This was a short that I
put it up, but warn everybody, don't listen to
it's Trudeau's voice. This is a thing.
40 years ago, your father famously took a walk in the snow when the Conservatives were up in the polls and decided it was time to give it up. It's snowing out there now.
When my father was my age, he still had a dozen years of prime ministering ahead of him.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Another dozen years?
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
No! He's so full of himself, right? You know he thinks like that. I'm sure he thinks he's
well, in all fairness, after that segment, he says, "No, I'm not going to do that." Like,
but I mean,
it's really awkward.
There's nobody around him. Yeah. We'll
just yes men. Completely just yes men. Now, the other interesting tidbit in December would be with the resignation of Freeland, Trudeau, with his typical nepotism, brought in his babysitter as the person who's literally his former babysitter. So he went from changing Trudeau's diapers to doing some other things with the
there was actually, December was a busy month, but for me the big story was Freeland. I think that was the big story for December. In the US, the story was there's a link to Canada and the US. I mean, the Trump trolling the shit out of us or out of Trudeau in December was pretty hilarious. But the big story in the US is Trump building his team. I mean, the dream team that he's building is just a crazy team. So
and the media is coming out in full force. I mean, you see what they're trying to do to sow division between that team, trying to pit people against Elon Musk, especially on the H-1B visa stuff, which I think is a misnomer. I think H-1B visas have been absolutely abused in the past, which I think is something that they're planning on working on to mitigating that abuse. Just like the LMIAs here in Canada, it's the same concept. It was brought in the 90s, and companies used it to replace their workers. Like literally having workers train their replacements. That was a thing. And it's good to criticize that, but look at what's being said. So I think that there's going to be reforms on the H-1B visa and how that works, but it's designed to bring in talent that doesn't exist in the United States. And you need, we've talked about this at length. We need some sort of semblance of immigration. We don't want mass immigration, but you do have to have immigration, because without it, you'll have complete holes missing in your economy.
Totally. So yeah, with that said, let's put it out to some of your viewers or people that are watching right now in the next segment. Maybe tell us, did I miss a big story? Or like do you generally agree, or did I miss a big story along the way? Like what stories stand out for some of the people throughout the year? I mean, if I had
for
to summarize,
people that are watching this live, we can do that in the next segment, which unfortunately, if you're watching this after the fact, is not part of the show that goes out on Thursdays. You got to catch this live. You got to watch this live on Wednesday evenings. But if you are a member, you can watch this afterwards in its entirety. If not, then got to be in the live. Before we get into that, Marty, predictions for 2025.
Boy, it's the same prediction as last year, or an election in a spring election. I'm predicting a spring election in Canada, and then in the US, I hope that Donald gets off to a super hard, strong start and starts making like big changes that, even though it's going to hurt us, I hope he does things in his country to. I hope he slaps tariffs on us and does things that would lead to a shakeup here. But also, I hope he creates or brokers a peace deal in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Those are my predictions.
He's got a history of doing that. The
predictions / wishes.
Yeah, absolutely. Marty, where can people find you?
Marty Up North on Twitter.